Okay, so we're going to talk about joints. So let's start. Joints. Okay. Okay. So classification of joints. I'm sure you guys know what a joint is. Okay. A joint can be classified two different ways. One is based on the amount of movement actually available, and two, the structure, what it actually looks like. Okay, so the functional classification is synovial. Okay, synovial is immovable. Okay, which means they never ever move. They barely adjust a little bit every so often. Okay, Emphyothrosis is slightly movable. Okay, and these two are more common in the axial skeleton. We don't move our axes around very often. We move our appendages much more often. Okay. The diarthrosis, okay, are freely movable. They're common in that particular skeleton, and they're all synovial joints are diarthrosis, and we'll get into what synovial joints are and why that's important. Okay. Okay. So the structural classification, okay, is based on material that binds the joint together, the presence or absence of a joint cavity, okay, and so the structural classification: fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. So we'll get into each type a little bit. Okay, so here's a summary. All right. Okay, fibrous joints. Fibrous joints are bone, fiber, bone. Okay, so bone connected by fibrous connective tissue. Because there's a fiber that directly connects bone A to bone B, okay, there is no cavity, there's no space. Okay, and because there's a fiber, most of them are only completely immovable or only slightly movable. Okay, so the types of fibrous joints are sutures, which we already talked about. Okay, syndesmosis and kyphosis. Okay, sutures occur only between the bones of the skull, and they look like sutures. And really, what they're actually for is they allow the skull to slowly expand as the person's brain grows. They don't actually like move like across each other or anything. They just expand. Okay. Like you'll see the same type of thing on bridges and stuff. There's little hooks that hook in like this, and all they do is when they get hot, they expand. They don't actually move side to side. Okay. Okay. Syndesmosis are bone, ligament, bone. Okay. And also, in most cases, okay, they're immovable. There's only one case where, a few cases actually, where they're freely movable, but they're rather rare. Okay. The last one, kyphosis, tooth and socket. Okay, so sutures, okay, syndesmosis, and kyphosis. Okay, and these are all fibrous joints. Okay. All right, cartilaginous joints. Okay, bone. Okay, cartilage, bone, cartilage, bone. Okay, and so there are two types. Okay, they also cartilaginous joints also lack joint cavities because it's cartilage holding them together. Okay, so there's two types, synchondrosis and symphysis. Okay, synchondrosis, okay, hyaline cartilage. Okay, so last time we learned the epiphyseal plate, or a couple of chapters ago, we learned the epiphyseal plate. Bone, hyaline cartilage, bone. Bone, hyaline cartilage, bone. Okay, symphysis require a little bit more strength to hold them together. So fibrocartilage. Okay, so bone, fibrocartilage, bone. Bone, fibrocartilage, bone. Okay. All right, synovial joints. Okay, synovial joints are the most movable type of joint. Okay, so I'm gonna focus most of my explanation of what a joint is on synovial joints because they're by far the most important. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about. All right, I like to explain all that previous stuff on the picture. Okay, so yeah, bone, bone, and in the middle is actually the synovial joint, but the synovial joint is actually physically a cavity. There's actually a space between the bones, and there's actually fluid in between. So you have a joint cavity. Okay, that joint cavity is filled with synovial fluid, and we'll talk about what that is in a little bit. But first, okay, let's talk about this. Layer of cartilage on this side, layer of cartilage on this side. So when these two actually ram together, they actually hit cartilage on cartilage, not bone on bone. Okay, so the capsule, okay, the fluid is not really good at holding things together, obviously. So what you need is ligaments that cross the joint. Okay, they either cross on the outside or they cross on the inside, but they cross the joint and physically attach the two parts of the joint together. Okay, okay. Now you have the capsule. Okay, the capsule is made out of two layers, a harder fibrous layer on the outside and a very soft synovial membrane on the inside. The purpose of the synovial membrane is to make synovial fluid. Okay. Okay. Synovial fluid, okay, is really a viscous fluid that's similar to raw egg white. Raw egg white is slippery, just like synovial fluid is. Okay, so what the whole synovial fluid does, it allows the joint to slide past one another. Okay? Okay. Well, you have to do something, or just imagine it, you don't actually have to do it. You rub your hands together, your hands get really hot. Okay? Go in the kitchen, or underneath your sink, either put oil on your hands or put, even better, WD-40 on your hands, and then do that. And you'll realize your hands don't get as hot. And the reason they don't get as hot is the oil allows them to slide past one another much easier and much quicker. Okay? This is why we have engine oil in our cars. Okay? If you run out of engine oil in your car pistons will rub against each other, against the engine, and it will overheat and bye-bye car. Same thing for your joints. Your synovial fluid, it keeps your joints from physically rubbing together, and overheating and damaging your joint, and rubbing against the joint will damage your joint. So that synovial fluid allows for the gliding of and reducing friction. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. The synovial joint is richly supplied with sensory nerves that can detect pain. Okay. Okay. So like joints hurt a lot, right? If you have ever had like swollen knee and stuff like that, and swollen joints, they hurt tremendously. And that's because there's a lot of nerve that goes into the joint. Because controlling the joint, knowing what the joint is doing, tells you what your body is doing. Okay. Okay. Joints tend to have a rich blood supply because they constantly need the blood to make synovial fluid from, and so there's a large blood supply that goes through the joints. Okay. Okay. Some joints also have a articular disc. Okay. So let's take. I'm gonna show you a joint that does have one, and that's gonna be the knee. Okay. I'll look at this. Okay. So if you notice, there is a disc right here in your jaw joint. And that disc actually allows these two pieces to fit together a little bit better. Okay. And the same your knee joint. The knee joint is surrounded by a disc called the meniscus. Okay. And if you watch sports a lot, you'll hear a lot of athletes get meniscus injuries. Okay, a torn meniscus or partially torn meniscus, etc. Okay. I'll show you what those pictures look like at the end of the chapter. Okay. Okay. Synovial joints, okay, like I said, they function as lubricating devices, okay? So they reduce friction, okay? So friction can overheat and destroy joint tissue. So inside the joint, you want to reduce friction. The purpose of synovial fluid is to reduce friction, okay? All right. In addition to that, we even have other things of reducing friction, and those are the bursa and the tendon sheath. Okay, bursa are closed bags of lubricant that are filled with synovial fluid, and they reduce friction between body elements. So here is a bursa. Okay, this is your scapula. This is your humerus. You see they come in contact very close to each other, and the arm moves. So this thing actually rub into that bone, the acromion, unless there's a bursa there. That bursa allows the joints to roll past one another. They roll kind of like the rollers on the luggage compartments, the luggage rollers. Okay, at an airport, they roll the same way. So rolling across that surface is much easier than pushing it across the floor. Okay, that roll reduces friction. The same thing, the bursa reduces friction. Okay, the tendon sheath is just a bursa that surrounds the entire tendon. So when the tendon moves, it rubs against the bursa or rubs against the tendon sheath and not against other tendons which cause friction. Okay. All right. The types of movement, there are three basic types of movement: gliding movements, angular movements, and rotational movements. Gliding is one bone sliding side to side, okay, against another one, Angular movement is a change in angle. So change in angle, okay? Change in angle, okay? And then rotation, okay? Okay. So gliding joints, the flat surfaces of two bones slide past one another. You'll see this here when you're here's the gliding. The little bones in the wrist are moving. Okay, when you twist, okay, when you turn your body around, you're turning your vertebrae like this on each other. Okay, that's a gliding motion. Okay, angular movements. Okay, flexion, extension, hyperextension. Okay, so let's talk about what these are. Okay, flexion is decreasing the angle, extension is increasing the angle. Okay, so flexion of the forearm, extension of the forearm, flexion of the forearm, extension of the forearm. Okay, flexion, like if I put my head down, flexion of the neck, extension of the neck. Okay, when I go past normal is hyperextension. Okay, so flexion, extension, hyperextension. Flexion, okay, extension. I can't hyperextend my arm willingly, right? Hyperextension, okay. Okay, flexion, extension, hyperextension. Okay, flexion. Okay, so if I lean down, flexion, extensions going back up. Hyperextension is when I lean backwards. Okay. Flexion of the shoulder. Okay. Extension of the shoulder, hyperextension of the shoulder. I'll explain in a later chapter, but moving like in most cases, anteriorly it's going to be flexion, posteriorly it's going to be extension. The only exception is the leg. Okay. Okay. Now, abduction and adduction. Abduct away from midline. Okay. If you abduct someone, they'll take their arm and pull it away from their body. Adduction, adduction is toward the midline, adding to the midline. Okay. So, okay. Abduction, adduction. Okay. Abduct away, adduct toward the midline. I can also use my hand, abduct, okay, adduct. Okay, so here is the midline, right now my middle finger is the midline. So abduction away from midline, adduction toward the midline. Okay. Circumduction is a combination of all those four movements. Okay, so watch my finger. I can flex. I can extend. I can abduct. I can adduct. Okay, so if I put them all together, I do this. So that is circumduction. Okay, I can circumduct my shoulder. Okay. Okay. So flexion, extension, okay. Circumduction right there, flexion, abduction, adduction. Okay. All right. Rotation is rotating one mode around another. So rotation, right? So the head, all I can do with the head is rotate, right? But with my limbs, I can rotate in either direction. So lateral rotation is away from midline. Medial rotation is toward the midline. Okay, so okay, you see my shoulder. This, okay, is going to be lateral rotation. This is going to be medial rotation. Okay, if you step out, okay, you are laterally rotating. When you step back in, you're medially rotating. Okay. Okay. elevation, depression. Elevation is lifting the body part superiorly. So my shoulders, elevation of the shoulders, depression of the shoulders. Okay. Opening my jaw, depression of the mandible. Closing my jaw, elevation of the mandible. Protraction, retraction. Protraction, okay, non-angular movement anteriorly, retraction, non-angular movement posteriorly. So if I stick my jaw out, okay, protraction of the jaw. When I put it back, retraction of the jaw. The proper term for sticking out the tongue, protraction of the tongue. Putting it back in, retraction of the tongue. Okay. Okay. Supination. Okay. So when you're in the anatomical position, you are naturally supinated. Okay. So the forearm rotates laterally, palm rotates anteriorly. Okay. Pronation is the opposite. So this is pronation. Okay. When you're in this position, my radius and ulnar form an X. When I'm supinated, my radius and ulnar are parallel to each other. The easy way to remember supination, if you're holding soup, your arms or forearms are supinated. Okay. Okay. There we go. Opposition, okay, definitely an important thing, and so definitely be on a test somewhere. The finger touching the other fingers. Okay, your thumb touching your fingertips. I mean, this seems like a joke to you guys, but this is really what makes us really cool, because the ability to do this allows us to grab pens, allows us to grab guns, and this is actually, and grab tree branches. This is actually, most animals can't do this. Okay. In fact, one of the only groups that are called primates, like monkeys and stuff. Okay. All right. Inversion, eversion. Inversion, okay. Inversion is this, eversion is out. So, okay. So I met someone who didn't know what hacky sack was yesterday. So maybe some of you guys know. But if you play hacky sack, or you're inverting your foot, okay. If you sprain your ankle, you are inverting your foot too far. Okay, like you can technically sprain your ankle this way, but it's extremely rare. It is much more often you sprain your ankle this way. You're inverting your foot too far. Okay, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. So how I'd like to explain it is more simple than that. This plantar flexion is what happens when you stand on your tiptoes. Okay, dorsiflexion is what happens when you rock back on your heels. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay, plane joints. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna pick this up. I'm gonna do this as part 2 instead of continuing. So this is only part 1. So we'll stop right here. Okay. And I'll see you for part 2.